Now, keep in mind that Germany, Italy, and Japan, they're not just three separate countries that are working to expand their empires and are invading a number of different countries, trying to gain colonies and resources. They're also connected with each other. Okay, they have signed treaties with each other, and they are now an alliance. Okay, they are a military alliance. Okay, known as the Axis powers. Okay, so Germany, Italy, Japan, the Axis powers. Okay, so now we have a joint effort here. Okay, so the Allies versus the Axis power. So let's talk about how the U.S. finally gets involved with World War II and the role that Japan plays in this. Okay, so as Japan continued to invade a number of different countries in East Asia and then in Southeast Asia, the U.S. stops all trade with Japan. Okay, because they see what's going on. China is an ally of the United States at the time, and so to support the Chinese, the United States stops trading with Japan. Okay, which is a major problem for Japan because most of Japan's oil comes from the United States. Okay, and if Japan doesn't have oil, how are they going to run their war machine, right? Their vehicles, their tanks, all that's going to come to a halt if there's no oil, right? Not to mention all of the other trade goods that came along with trade with the United States, all right? So in 1941, Japan is going to attack the United States. Okay, so Japan attacks the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in hopes of destroying the U.S. Navy. All right, so many planes, many ships were all destroyed in this attack on Pearl Harbor, but there were no aircraft carriers present at the base at the time, which is important because those aircraft carriers are going to be used in the war in the Pacific against Japan later on. Right, so basically Japan's plan of destroying the U.S. Navy failed, even though a number of planes and ships were destroyed in the attack on Pearl Harbor. So the attack is going to bring the United States into the war, right? Finally, like the U.S. is actually going to fight in the war now. So President Roosevelt is asking for a declaration of war, and Congress is going to give it to him. They're going to declare war on Japan, and in reaction, Germany, which is a part of the Axis powers, remember, there's a treaty between Germany and Italy and Japan. Germany is going to declare war on the United States after that. Okay, so now it's on. The U.S. is fully in to World War II. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the war in the Pacific, right, in the Pacific Ocean. This is where U.S. Japanese forces are going to go head to head on a number of different islands that Japan had taken over and occupied earlier. Okay, one of the key battles was the Battle of Midway. Before the Battle of Midway in 1942, Japanese forces were doing fairly well against the U.S., right? They had several victories. But once we get to 1942, with the Battle of Midway, then the tide is going to turn. So U.S. forces were able to gain a very important victory at the Battle of Midway. And the way that they did this was they were able to break Japan's communication code. Because if you could break a country's secret code, then you understand what their military is going to do ahead of time. You could plan for it, and you could attack them and catch them off guard. Okay? So the U.S. breaks Japan's communication code, wins the Battle of Midway. And after the battle, the U.S. forces are going to go on a very violent military campaign going from island to island. It's called island hopping. So they go on this island hopping campaign where their forces engage the Japanese military on a number of different islands that Japan had occupied in the Pacific Ocean. Okay, it's going from one island to another, one battle at a time. And basically the US is trying to defeat Japanese forces to regain these islands that Japan had occupied and eventually make their way to Japan, where the US will begin a bombing campaign on Japan itself. Okay, so this is the war in the Pacific. After the Battle of Midway, U.S. forces are going to have a string of victories in the war in the Pacific and eventually launch a bombing campaign on Japan. Now, as I said earlier, it's World War II that pretty much breaks the Great Depression, right? Because the U.S. is going to be spending heavily on war-related industries, okay? And that's going to give jobs to a number of Americans, and then they're going to have money in their pockets. They can spend that money in the economy, and it's going to help to revive the economy in the United States and end the Great Depression, okay? So let's talk a little bit more about this. So similar to World War I, the federal government is going to create a number of different agencies during the war to control the economy. right? To control prices, to control wages, to control the amount of production in various different industries, right? They're trying to be as efficient as possible with resources to help the war effort. Okay, so how does the U.S. finance the war? Where's the money going to come from to finance this war? Well, in a number of different ways. For example, well, the government brought in a large amount of revenue from the sale of war bonds. Okay, so if you're a patriotic American, you go out, you buy a war bond, you're investing in the country, okay, and then you're eventually going to get your money back plus interest. We talked about this. Okay, so the government's going to sell a number of war bonds. It's going to help to raise revenue for the war. Also, the United States is going to expand the income tax so that it's not just rich people who are paying income taxes, but the general public as well. Okay, so this is when the government is going to first start taking income taxes directly out of people's checks, right? So they're not going to leave it up to you to give your money to them at the end of the year. No, we need that money right now for the war effort. Okay, and then that policy just continues on, and we're still doing that today. Okay, so yes, as I said earlier, it's World War II. It's the war economy that's going to break the Great Depression for the United States, right? It's because of massive government spending. And this is in line with an economic philosophy known as Keynesian economics, right? It's named after an economist whose name is John Maynard Keynes. Okay, so Keynesian economics, it's an economic philosophy that argues that governments need to spend heavily in the economy, even if it makes the country go into debt. And this is all in order to give people enough money, the money that they need, right, to start making purchases again, right? Because if people are making purchases, that means that you have demand increasing. And if demand increases, then companies can hire more people to increase their production to meet that demand. And this is how you end a Great Depression, right? So Keynesian economics is the idea. And it does work, right? It's all that government spending that is going to bring the U.S. out of the Depression. So yes, the U.S. Spent massive amounts of money on war industries, providing millions of jobs, which brought the unemployment rate down to 2% by 1943. And that's what ends the Great Depression, okay? Massive government contracts are going to be going to the more powerful corporations that are in the country rather than being spread evenly to both large and small businesses. Now, it's mostly just the powerful corporations who get these massive government contracts. Industries that are related to military production are going to be developed on the West Coast. You have aircraft and steel industries developing in Southern California. And so this is going to be the source for a lot of jobs, millions of jobs, as people start to get jobs at these factories that are related to the war industries. Okay, so making planes, making tanks, making trucks. This is going to create a number of different jobs and help to break the Great Depression.